Welcome to the Significant Figures review for your test. Before you can do what you have to do on the test, which is basically adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing with sig figs, you have to know the Sig Fig rules by heart. So the first thing is to memorize these. You have to know these. You're not going to have them in front of you, so you have to get used to them. And until you have these down, you should not move on to the next step. Here's the deal. If it's not a zero, it's automatically significant. So all the non-zero numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, they're all significant. Zeros that are trapped between numbers are significant. So like 109, that zero is significant. Or even this one, look, 109.09. Both of those zeros are significant because they're both trapped between numbers. So it doesn't matter if there's a decimal or not. Trapped zeros are still trapped between numbers. Trailing zeros are kind of weird. Here's one case of trailing zeros. Here's another case. The zero is only significant if it comes at the end, if there's a decimal somewhere in the number. Putting a decimal in the number makes the zeros significant. So this zero is significant because there's a decimal. These zeros are not because there's no decimal. Finally, leading zeros are never significant. And leading zeros come with a decimal, right? So there's a decimal and then 1, 2, 3 zeros. This only has two significant figures. These three zeros are leaders. They're leading zeros. They come before any numbers. They don't count. They don't count. However, if I put a zero at the end, it does count. So, once you know the rules, then you can start applying them to rounding. But you can't start rounding stuff until you know these rules. So let's make sure you know the rules on the next screen. Okay, pause and see if you can figure out how many significant digits you see in each of these numbers. Go ahead and write them down and then come back and see if you got them right. In the upper left-hand corner, this one right here, that zero is a leading zero. So it is not significant. So there's one significant figure here. In the next one, this is a trailing zero. There's no decimal on the page. So that zero doesn't count. It's not significant. So this one also has one sig fig. In this one, that zero at the end is a trailing zero, but there is a decimal. So that makes it significant. So this one has 4. Do you see the difference between this zero at the end and this zero at the end? What's the difference? The one on the end here comes with a decimal, so it's significant. This one does not, so it's not. What about this one? Well, I have one leading zero, this one, which does not count. And I have two trailing zeros, and there's a decimal, which do count. So that adds up to 3. That's a tricky one. You got to remember the leading zero doesn't count, but the trailing ones do. 810, this is a trailing zero but no decimal, so there's only two significant figures. These zeros are trapped, so they're significant. They're caught between two numbers. These zeros are also trapped. They're caught between two numbers, so they count. And these zeros are significant because they're trailing after a decimal. Okay. If that wasn't enough practice for you, if you're still getting these wrong, you need to come see me and we need to talk about it. Or you need to do practice problems online or with some of the worksheets that I have for you. You need more practice if you're not getting most of these right. Once you're able to get these right, you can move on to the next slide. Okay, now let's try rounding using the Sig Fig rules. So what you have to do when you're rounding is ask yourself, how many significant digits does the number have right now? And where do I have to cut it off? So in the first number, I'll do this one as a sample, 0.791 has 3 significant figures. There's no zeros. But I'm only allowed 1. So that one is going to be here. But whenever you're rounding, you always have to ask what's the number next to the number that I'm rounding to. Well, the number next to it is a 9, which means I have to round this 7 up, and I'm going to make it a 0.8. Because I'm only allowed 1 significant digit. Pause the tutorial and see if you can do that. Remember, when you're looking at the zeros, you have to know whether those zeros are or are not significant. Some of those zeros are going to stay there but not add anything to your total of significant figures. So go ahead and practice them, then come back and look. Okay, so for 0.0089, this has 2 significant digits, so I need to get rid of one of them. So obviously what I want is to have this 2 zeros stay there because they don't count. They're not significant. They're placeholders. They're leading zeros. So they're going to stay there. That 8 has to be rounded up, though, to a 9. And that's my one sig fig right there. Tricky, right? Now, in the next one, I have 3 sig figs. That trailing zero is not significant. But I'm only allowed 1. This example really bothers a lot of students because basically what I'm saying is I only measured out to the thousands place. I don't know anything about what the hundreds place has, what the tens place has, what the ones place has. So I have to round to the nearest thousand. So since 20 is pretty low, we're rounding straight to 1,000 because we're only allowed one significant digit. Basically, you're looking at the 1, that's our significant digit, and asking yourself, does it stay a 1 or does it become a 2? And that depends on what's next to it. Since this is a 0, it's going to stay a 1. Everything else is going to stay zeros. You have to write those zeros because you're not going to round 1,020 down to 1. You're going to round it down to 1,000. Those 3 zeros on the end are not significant, so they're not adding any significant figures to your number. But they do have to be there in order to tell the person, hey, we're in the thousands place. Look at the next one. Here, same deal. We're only allowed one significant digit. It's got to be the 7, but we're in the hundreds place, and we have to stay in the hundreds place. The question is this going to be 700 or 800? And quite clearly, 702 rounds down to 700. We'd have to get 750 or higher before we're rounding up to 800. 85, same deal here, right? We're only allowed to have something in this place, but because it's a 5, I've got to round up to a 9, and I have to put the 0 there to hold the place, because we're in the tens place. Same deal here. That 7's going to stay a 7 because it's next to a 3, and that 3 is going to become a 0. In this one, these leading zeros are not significant, so they stay there to hold our place. The question is, what do I do with that 5? Does it stay a 5 or does it become a 6? It stays a 5 because it's next to a 1. All right, if you've been messing these up, here's your chance to try this one again before I do it. Pause it, rethink it. Okay, so I have 4 sig figs, but I'm only allowed 1. It's got to be the 2 in this spot, and I have to show that I'm in the thousands place. And I'm not rounding up, I'm staying with the 2, right, because I'm next to a 1. If this number was 2902, I'd round that to 3,000, because the 9 would make this 2 a 3. Okay, if you have that down, the next step is to multiply, divide, add, and subtract, and apply the 2 different rules to the rounding. Okay, in short, here are the rules. If you add or subtract some numbers, when you're done, your answer can't have any more decimal places than the least of your starting numbers. So for example, let's say you had 30 plus 0.006. If you put that into the calculator, you're going to get 30.006. But you're going to round it so that your answer has as many decimal places as the number that had the least decimal places. Since 30 has no decimal places, my answer can have no decimal places. So I'll round this to just 30. Don't confuse decimal places with sig figs. Significant figures, you have to figure out whether the zeros are significant or not. Decimal places are just numbers that come after a decimal. When you're multiplying or dividing, your answer can't have any more significant digits than the least of your numbers. So if I were multiplying 30 times 0.006, if I do that on my calculator, I get 0.18. How many significant digits do I have in 30? Just 1. How many in here? Also just 1. So my answer can only have 1 sig fig. So I've got to round this to 0.2. So the next slide is practice problems. Okay, so try each of these and see what you would round your answer to, and then come back and see what I did. So in the first one, 112.4 plus 34. When I put it into my calculator, I get 146.4. How many sig figs am I looking for here? Well, you have to be careful because it's not sig figs when you're adding and subtracting. It's decimal places. So in this number, I've got one decimal place, and I also have one decimal place in that number, so my answer can have one decimal place, so I'm already there. 146.4 is the correct answer. In other words, both of my numbers go out to the same number of decimal places, so that's good. My answer can have that many decimal places. Let's try the second one, 1001 times 20. When I put that into my calculator, I get 20020. Multiplying and dividing means we have to think sig figs. 1001 has 4 sig figs, because those trapped zeros are significant, but 20 only has 1, so my answer can only have 1. So I've got to make sure that I convert this to just this. Remember, all these zeros are not significant, but they do have to be there to hold the place, right? I'm not going to round 200, or I'm not going to round 20,000 down to 2. I have to round it down to 20,000. 20,020 rounds down to 20,000. All right, in this one, bottom left, when I multiply 0.009 times 3001, I get 27.009. I'm multiplying, so that means that I have to look at the number of significant digits in each number. The first one has 2 leading zeros, so it only has 1 sig fig, but this one has 4. So my answer, again, can only have 1 sig fig. It's got to be this number, but I'm in the tens place, and I have to show that. I'm going to round up because of the 7, so this becomes just 30. In the last problem, I'm adding again. When I put this into my calculator, I get 56.1. This has 4 sig figs. I'm sorry, it has 2 decimal places, though. That's what we care about here, 2 decimal places. And this guy only has 1. But my answer only has 1. So that's kind of perfect, right? 56.1 is my answer. Okay, so that's what you have to be able to do on the test, and it's a matter of practice. Practice makes you better at this. So keep practicing until you get good. See you in the next tutorial.